Kestrel Vashon had been motionless for 11 hours. The jungle breathed around her in waves of humidity and rot, insects screaming their endless chorus into the fading light. But she had become part of the green and the waiting. Through her scope, she watched the valley below turn gold with the dying sun. Somewhere down there, her team was walking into a kill zone, and the man who had left her on this ridge to die had no idea that she was the only thing standing between them and annihilation. Before we go deeper into this jungle, drop a comment and let us know where you are watching from. Maybe you know someone who served in places like this, in the forgotten corners of the world where shadows hold their breath. 11 hours earlier, Firebase Coral had hummed with the quiet tension that preceded every mission. Vashon had checked her rifle for the third time that morning, running her fingers along the stock of the M40 A6 she called Rougarou. The weapon had been with her through 3 deployments. 47 confirmed kills, each one a story she carried in silence. Senior Chief Harlan Briggs had walked past her without acknowledgement, his boots striking the plywood floor of the Tactical Operations Center with the confidence of a man who had never questioned his own judgment. He stopped at the map board, his back to her, and began the mission brief as if she were not in the room. "Gentlemen," he said, "we insert at 0600. 12 clicks through triple canopy to the observation point. Local partner forces report enemy militia movement along the old French colonial trail. Our job is eyes on, confirmation of numbers, and exfil by nightfall." Petty Officer First Class Tomas Salcedo caught her eye from across the room. The medic's expression carried the familiar weight of apology, the look he always wore when Briggs pretended she did not exist. She gave him nothing back. Reactions were currency, and she had learned long ago not to spend them on men like Briggs. "Vashon," Briggs said without turning, "you will establish overwatch on the eastern ridgeline. Remain in position until the team completes reconnaissance. Do not engage unless directly threatened. Do you understand your role?" The question carried its intended insult. 3 deployments, 47 confirmed, and he spoke to her like a boot fresh from qualification. "Understood, Senior Chief." He turned then, his eyes finding hers for the first time that morning. There was something in his gaze that went beyond professional contempt, something personal that she had never been able to name. He looked at her the way her father's old fishing partners had looked at her mother after the funeral, like she was a problem that refused to solve itself. The rest of the brief continued without her input. She memorized the terrain features, the extraction coordinates, the emergency frequencies. She noted the positions each team member would hold and the contingencies for contact. And she watched Briggs avoid looking at her again, as if her presence was a stone in his boot that he had resolved to ignore until it drew blood. After the brief, Salcedo found her near the helicopter pad. The morning heat was already oppressive, the air thick enough to chew. "He's going to get someone killed," Salcedo said quietly. "His arrogance, I mean. Not you." Vashon adjusted the sling on Rougarou. "The senior chief has 19 years in the teams. He has forgotten more about operations than most operators learn. That is generous. That is accurate." She met his eyes. Being accurate about people does not mean you have to like them. Salcedo almost smiled. "My grandmother used to say something like that. She said you can respect the snake for its speed while still watching where you step." Smart woman. She raised 7 kids in Juarez. Smart with survival. For a moment, the weight lifted. Vashon allowed herself to remember her own grandmother, the woman who had taught her to clean fish and read the weather and the movement of birds. The woman who had told her that patience was not passive, that waiting was its own kind of action. "Your personal best," Salcedo said. "With the rifle. What is it?" She considered the question. Most snipers inflated their numbers, turned kills into legend. She had never seen the point. 2,300 meters. Confirmed. Salcedo whistled low. "In what conditions?" "Crosswind. Dust. Target was moving." He shook his head. "And Briggs thinks you need supervision." "Briggs thinks a lot of things." The helicopter blades began their rotation, the sound building from a whisper to a roar. Vashon shouldered her pack and moved toward the bird without looking back. She had learned that lesson, too, from her grandfather. The man who had crawled through tunnels in this same country 50 years ago. Never look back at what you were leaving. Only forward at what you were walking into. The insertion went smooth. Too smooth, her instincts whispered, but she filed the warning away and focused on the terrain. Triple canopy jungle swallowed the light within minutes of their landing. The world reduced to green shadows and the endless drip of moisture from leaves the size of dinner plates. She moved at the rear of the formation, her eyes tracking movement patterns in the undergrowth, cataloging the sounds that belonged and the silences that did not. 6 hours into the patrol, she spotted the first sign. A broken branch at knee height, the exposed wood still pale and fresh. Someone had passed this way recently. Someone trying not to be seen. She keyed her radio. Overwatch to lead. Signs of recent passage. Single file movement, northbound. Less than 6 hours old. Briggs responded without breaking stride. Noted. Continue mission. Senior Chief, the sign suggests we are being paralleled. Recommend we adjust route to the western approach. The pause lasted 3 seconds. 3 seconds of jungle silence and distant bird calls and the knowledge that he was weighing her assessment against his pride. Negative, Overwatch. Maintain current heading. Out. Salcedo glanced back at her. She saw the question in his eyes and answered it with a small shake of her head. Not now. Not here. The mission continued, and she buried her concern beneath the discipline that had carried her through 1,000 moments just like this one. But she also began a plan, because her grandfather had taught her something else in those long Louisiana nights. When the gators circle, you do not wait for them to choose their moment. You choose yours. The ridge came into view at 1400 hours. Briggs signaled a halt. Vachon, he said, establish position here. Overwatch the valley. The team will proceed to the observation point and return before nightfall. She studied the terrain. The ridge offered excellent sight lines, but limited escape routes. If contact occurred, she would be isolated. Exposed. Senior Chief, she said carefully, standard protocol calls for sniper teams to maintain visual contact with supported elements. This position will put me outside effective support range. Briggs turned. The look on his face was one she had seen before, on men who had already made their decisions and resented being asked to explain them. I am aware of protocol. Chief Vachon. I am also aware that this terrain requires adaptation. You will hold this position until we return. Clear? The words sat in her throat like a stone. She looked at the jungle below, at the shadows gathering between the trees, at the silence that felt less like peace and more like patience. Clear, Senior Chief. The team moved out. Salcedo was the last to pass, his hand brushing her shoulder in a gesture that said what his voice could not. She watched them descend into the green darkness until even their sounds faded into nothing. Alone, she settled into position, adjusting Rougarou's bipod on a fallen log, and began the familiar ritual of becoming invisible. Breath slowing, muscles releasing, mind expanding to encompass every sound, every shadow, every whisper of wind through leaves. The sun tracked across the sky. Birds called and fell silent. Somewhere in the valley, her team moved towards something they could not see. And then, as the light turned golden and the shadows stretched long across the jungle floor, the first shot cracked through the silence. Then another. Then the unmistakable thunder of an ambush sprung. Vachon pressed her eye to the scope. Below, muzzle flashes sparked in the darkness beneath the canopy. She could hear the rhythm of the firefight, the desperate staccato of her team returning fire against a force that sounded far larger than anything the intelligence had suggested. Her hand found the bolt of Rougarou. She chambered around. Somewhere down there, the men who had left her behind were dying, and she had a choice to make. The firefight below painted the jungle in strobes of light and shadow. Vachon counted the muzzle flashes through her scope, her mind cataloging positions with the cold precision that had kept her alive through 3 deployments. 12 shooters on the eastern flank, 8 more on the western. Her team was caught in the center of a horseshoe ambush, the kind of kill box that left no survivors unless something changed the equation. She keyed her radio. Overwatch to lead. I have eyes on enemy positions. Request permission to engage. Static answered. Then Briggs's voice, strained and breathless. Negative, Overwatch. Maintain position. We are maneuvering to break contact. Senior Chief, you are pinned. I can suppress the eastern flank and create an opening. I said negative. The words came sharp, almost panicked. Hold your position. That is an order. The radio went dead. Vachon lifted her eye from the scope and stared at the receiver in her hand. Below, the gunfire intensified. She could hear the distinctive bark of American weapons being answered by the heavier chatter of enemy automatic fire. The sound told a story that Briggs's words had tried to hide. They were not maneuvering. They were dying. She thought of Darnell, Petty Officer Second Class Darnell Obi, who had been her spotter for 2 years before a rooftop in Kandahar took him from her. She remembered the last thing he had said before the bullet found him. Trust yourself, Kess. When everything goes sideways, trust yourself. Her hands steadied on Rougarou. Briggs had given her an order. Regulations were clear. Chain of command existed for reasons that had been written in blood across 2 centuries of American warfare. A sniper who went rogue endangered not just herself, but every operator who depended on coordinated action. But regulations also assumed that the chain of command was functioning, that orders came from judgment rather than prejudice, that the men giving commands valued the lives of everyone under them equally. She pressed her eye to the scope again. The eastern flank shooters had advanced, tightening the noose. In 3 minutes, maybe 4, they would have angles on her team that no amount of return fire could counter. She watched one of the enemy fighters gesture to his companions, directing them forward with the confidence of a man who knew he had already won. Vachon made her choice. She exhaled slowly, feeling her heartbeat in her fingertips. The crosshairs settled on the gesturing man, the one whose body language marked him as leadership. Range, 640 meters. Wind, negligible under the canopy. Humidity affecting bullet drop by 0.3 minutes of angle. Rougarou spoke. The leader dropped without a sound, his body folding in on itself like a puppet with cut strings. For a moment, nothing changed. Then the fighters around him began to look, to point, to realize that death had come from somewhere they had not expected. She worked the bolt, chambered another round, found her second target. The rifle spoke again. Another body fell. Now they knew. The enemy fighters on the eastern flank began to scatter, their coordinated advance dissolving into chaos as they searched for cover from a threat they could not locate. Vachon tracked their movement through her scope, patient as the bayou herons her grandfather had taught her to watch as a child. When one of them made the mistake of exposing himself against a tree trunk, she corrected his error permanently. 3 down in 40 seconds. The eastern flank had stopped advancing. Her radio crackled. Who the hell is shooting? Salcedo's voice, ragged with adrenaline. Overwatch, she replied calmly. Eastern flank suppressed. Recommend you break west. I will cover your movement. A pause. Then Briggs, his voice carrying a different quality now. Something between fury and disbelief. I ordered you to hold position. I am holding position, Senior Chief. I'm also engaging targets of opportunity. With respect, you can court-martial me later if we survive. She did not wait for his response. Through her scope, she saw movement on the western flank. The enemy there had realized what was happening and were attempting to reposition, to find the sniper who had shattered their ambush. She swung Rougarou toward them, searching for the shot that would buy her team another few seconds of life. The jungle had become a different kind of battlefield now. No longer a simple ambush, but a 3-dimensional chess game played in shadows and muzzle flashes. The enemy had numbers and position. She had precision and high ground. The mathematics of violence tilted on a fulcrum of skill and nerve. She found a target. A fighter sprinting between trees, his weapon clutched against his chest. The shot was difficult. Moving target, partial concealment, fading light. Most snipers would have waited for a better opportunity. Vachon was not most snipers. Rougarou barked. The runner stumbled, pitched forward, and did not rise. For confirmed. The enemy advance had stalled completely now, fighters huddling behind whatever cover they could find, their confidence bleeding out into the jungle floor alongside their fallen comrades. She could feel the shift in momentum, the way a battle could turn on moments of applied violence. Below, her team began to move. She watched them through her scope, covering their withdrawal with the patient attention of a shepherd watching over wolves. Salcedo was supporting another operator, half carrying him through the undergrowth. Briggs moved at the rear, his rifle up, his movements sharp with the energy of a man who had expected to die and found himself still breathing. They were not clear yet. The enemy would regroup. Whoever commanded this ambush would not let an American team escape without pursuit. But for now, in this moment, her team was alive because she had chosen disobedience over death. Vachon allowed herself one breath of something that was not quite relief. Then she began to move. The ridge position was compromised now. The enemy knew her general location, and it would not take them long to send hunters up the slope. She needed to relocate, to find new ground from which to continue her work. The jungle that had felt like a prison an hour ago now felt like home. The way the bayous had felt when she was young and her grandfather taught her to disappear into the cypress shadows. She broke down her position with practiced efficiency. Rougarou across her back, pack secured, every trace of her presence erased within 60 seconds. Then she was moving, slipping through the undergrowth with the silence that had earned her call sign. Kestrel, the small falcon that hunted from hidden perches. The bird that struck before its prey knew death was watching. The jungle closed around her as she descended from the ridge, angling northwest toward the route her team would have to take to reach extraction. She moved by instinct and training, her feet finding the quiet ground, her body flowing around obstacles that would have betrayed a lesser operator. Every sense extended outward, reading the forest for threats. She had traveled perhaps 400 meters when she heard them. Voices ahead, speaking in rapid Vietnamese. The accent was wrong for local militia. These were trained soldiers, professional voices giving professional orders. Vachon froze. Slowly, with movements measured in millimeters, she lowered herself into the undergrowth and became part of the jungle floor. Through the leaves, she counted them. 8 fighters moving in patrol formation, their weapons clean and their movements disciplined. They were not searching randomly. They were heading toward the river crossing, the only extraction point in the area of operations. They knew where her team was going. She watched them pass, close enough to smell the tobacco on their uniforms. One of them paused barely 10 feet from her position, his eyes scanning the shadows. She did not breathe, did not blink, became nothing but another shadow among thousands. The moment stretched. Then the soldier moved on, following his companions toward the river. Vachon waited until their sounds faded completely before she allowed herself to breathe again. Her mind raced through the implications. This was not a random militia ambush. This was a coordinated operation with multiple elements, blocking forces positioned to cut off retreat. Her team was walking into a second trap. She checked her ammunition. 14 rounds remaining for Rougarou. Her sidearm carried another 15, against what she estimated were 40 or more enemy fighters between here and extraction. The math was impossible. The mission was hopeless. Every tactical principle she had ever learned told her to find a hide position and wait for rescue. But her team did not know what was waiting for them at the river. Vachon rose from the jungle floor and began to move again, faster now, racing the enemy toward a confrontation that would demand everything she had, and possibly more. The jungle had a heartbeat. Vachon had learned to feel it during her first deployment, the way the forest breathed and shifted around those who moved through it. Right now, that heartbeat was wrong. Too quiet in some places, too loud in others. The rhythm of predators circling prey. She moved through the undergrowth like water finding its path downhill, each step chosen for silence, each pause calibrated to the sounds around her. The professional soldiers she had observed were 30 minutes ahead, maybe less. Her team was somewhere between her position and the river, unaware that extraction had become execution. A bird called from her left. 3 sharp notes followed by silence. She froze. That was not a bird. That was a signal. Vashon dropped into a crouch, her eyes scanning the shadows. Movement registered at the edge of her vision. Two fighters, younger than the professionals she had seen earlier, moving parallel to her path. Local militia, judging by their mismatched uniforms and nervous energy. They were sweepers, she realized. Scouts pushing through the jungle to flush out anyone who had escaped the initial ambush. She considered her options. Engaging would reveal her position. The sound of Rougarou would echo through the valley, drawing every enemy fighter within 2 kilometers. But letting them pass meant they would eventually find her team from behind, adding more guns to an already impossible equation. The decision made itself. She drew her knife. The first sweeper died without knowing she existed. One moment he was scanning the trees ahead. The next her blade found the gap between his skull and spine. She caught his body as it fell, lowering him silently into the ferns. His companion walked on for 3 steps before realizing he was alone. He turned. His eyes found her. His mouth opened to shout. She was already moving. The knife took him in the throat before the first syllable escaped. He collapsed against her, his blood warm on her hands, his final breath a wet gurgle that the jungle swallowed without echo. Vashon laid him beside his companion and cleaned her blade on his shirt. 6 confirmed now. The number should have meant something, but arithmetic had stopped matching hours ago. Only the next threat mattered. Only the next step toward her team. She stripped the bodies of useful equipment. 2 fragmentation grenades, a radio she could monitor for enemy communications, and a rough map marked with positions and routes. The map confirmed her fears. For separate elements were converging on the river crossing. Her team was walking into a kill zone that made the initial ambush look like a welcoming party. The enemy radio crackled. A voice spoke in Vietnamese, calm and professional. She understood enough to catch the meaning. The sniper from the ridge. Find her. Kill her. The river operation proceeds on schedule. They knew about her. They were hunting her specifically now, allocating resources to eliminate the unknown variable that had disrupted their ambush. In a twisted way, it was a compliment. They respected the threat she represented. Vashon pocketed the radio and continued moving. The terrain grew steeper as she descended toward the valley floor. Ancient trees rose around her like columns in a cathedral, their canopy blocking what remained of the fading light. She navigated by instinct and the occasional glimpse of sky, keeping the river sound to her right, adjusting her path to intercept her team before they reached the crossing. Memories surfaced unbidden as she moved. Her grandfather sitting on the porch of his fishing camp, cleaning his old service rifle while she sat at his feet. He had spoken rarely about Vietnam, but when he did, his words carried weight that she felt even as a child. The jungle does not care about your plans, he had told her once. It does not care about your training or your weapons or your courage. The jungle only cares about patience. You wait for the jungle to show you what it wants, and then you move with it, not against it. She had been 8 years old. She had not understood. Now, 3 decades later, his words were her lifeline. A clearing opened ahead, a rare gap in the canopy where a massive tree had fallen years ago. Moonlight spilled through the opening, painting the forest floor in silver and shadow. Vashon paused at the edge, studying the space before committing to cross it. Movement caught her eye. On the far side of the clearing, barely visible in the darkness, a figure crouched behind a fallen log. The silhouette was wrong for enemy militia. The posture, the way the weapon was held, the subtle tension in the shoulders. American. She keyed her radio to the team frequency, keeping her voice barely above a whisper. Overwatch to any station. I am 50 meters east of your position. Friendly approaching from the tree line. Do not shoot. Silence. Then Salcedo's voice, tight with relief. Kiss. Thank God. We thought you were dead. She crossed the clearing in quick, low movements, sliding into position beside the medic. Up close, she could see the exhaustion carved into his face, the blood staining his sleeve from a wound he had not bothered to treat. Beyond him, 2 more operators lay against the log, one of them unconscious with a bandage wrapped around his head. Where's Briggs? She asked. Salcedo's expression flickered. 50 meters north with Kowalski. He is establishing a perimeter. The others? The medic looked away. Hendricks did not make out of the kill zone. Morrison took 2 rounds in the chest. I did what I could, but without medevac, he did not finish. He did not need to. Vachon absorbed the information. 2 dead, 1 critical, 1 wounded. Out of 8 operators who had inserted that morning, only 5 remained combat effective. And between them and extraction stood an enemy force that outnumbered them 8-1. She pulled out the capture map and spread it on the ground. Salcedo leaned in, his eyes widening as he processed the markings. Madre de Dios, Everith. They have the river covered from 3 positions. We walk into that, we are finished. We're not walking into it. Then what? Vachon traced a route on the map, her finger following a line that curved away from the river and toward the northwest. Here, there's an old plantation about 4 kilometers from our position. French colonial era, abandoned for decades. If we can reach it, we have defensible terrain and an alternate extraction point. Salcedo shook his head. For kilometers through jungle at night with wounded, and Briggs will never agree to abandon the primary extraction. He is already talking about pushing through to the river. She met his eyes. Then Briggs is going to get everyone killed. The words hung between them. Insubordination, mutiny, career-ending accusations if they survived long enough for accusations to matter. Salcedo looked at the map again, at the enemy positions marked in red, at the impossible math of their situation. What do you need from me? He asked quietly. Before she could answer, footsteps approached from the north. Briggs emerged from the darkness, Kowalski at his shoulder. The senior chief's face was streaked with dirt and dried blood, his uniform torn in 3 places. He looked at Vachon with an expression she could not read. Chief Vachon, he said, you disobeyed a direct order. Yes, senior chief. His jaw tightened. Because of your actions, the enemy now knows we have a sniper in the area. They're actively hunting you, which means they are actively hunting us. She held his gaze. Because of my actions, you are alive to complain about it. Briggs took a step forward. Kowalski's hand moved to his arm, a gentle restraint. We do not have time for this, the younger operator said. Senior Chief, she is right. We would be dead in that valley if she had not engaged. Briggs looked at Kowalski, at Salcedo, at the wounded men who represented what remained of his command. Something shifted in his expression. Not acceptance, not gratitude, but perhaps the beginning of calculation. What is your assessment, Chief Vachon? He asked through clenched teeth. She handed him the map. The river is a trap. We need another way out. Briggs studied the markings. The seconds stretched. Finally, he folded the map and tucked it into his vest. Show me, he said. The plantation route would take them through the Valley of Whispers. Vachon had noted the terrain feature on the capture map, a stretch of dense bamboo forest that local forces had marked with a symbol she did not recognize. When she asked Salcedo about it, he translated the Vietnamese notation with a grim expression. Haunted, he said. The locals believe spirits live in the bamboo. They avoid it even during daylight. Superstition could work in their favor. If the enemy shared those beliefs, the valley might offer passage that patrols would not cover. It was a thin hope, but thin hopes were all they had left. Briggs organized the movement with the efficiency that had earned him 19 years in the teams. Whatever his failings in judgment, the man knew how to move wounded operators through hostile terrain. Kowalski took point, his movements careful and controlled. Salcedo supported Morrison, the critical casualty whose breathing had grown shallow in the last hour. Briggs positioned himself at the rear, his rifle covering their back trail. Vachon moved ahead of the main element, scouting the route 50 meters in advance. The role suited her. Alone in the darkness, she could read the jungle without distraction, feel its rhythms without the noise of other bodies moving through the brush. The first kilometer passed without contact. The second brought them to the edge of the bamboo forest, where the jungle gave way to towering stalks that creaked and whispered in the night breeze. Vachon understood now why the locals called it haunted. The sound was almost human, like voices murmuring just beyond comprehension. She signaled the team forward. Inside the bamboo, the world transformed. Moonlight filtered through the dense growth and scattered beams, creating a maze of silver and shadow. The ground was soft with decomposed leaves, muffling their footsteps. The whispers surrounded them, an endless chorus that masked small sounds and played tricks on the ears. They had traveled perhaps 800 meters when Vashon raised her fist. The team froze. Ahead, barely visible through the bamboo, a light flickered. Not moonlight, something artificial. She dropped to one knee and raised her scope, using it as a monocular to study the source. A camp, small, perhaps a dozen fighters, gathered around a low fire that had been shielded from aerial observation. They were not moving, not patrolling. They were waiting, a blocking position covering the route to the plantation. She eased back to the team and conveyed the situation in whispered fragments. 12 hostiles. Blocking position. No way around without adding 2 hours to their movement. Morrison did not have 2 hours. His breathing had developed a wet rattle that Salcedo recognized as internal bleeding. Every minute they delayed reduced his chances of survival. Briggs studied the terrain, his expression unreadable. We pushed through. Suppressed weapons, close range. Fast and quiet. Vashon shook her head. 12 targets in a close environment. Even suppressed, the first shot will alert them. We lose surprise after the initial engagement. Then what do you suggest, Chief? Briggs's voice carried an edge. Wait here until Morrison bleeds out? I suggest we use what we have. She pulled one of the captured grenades from her vest. I moved to the far side of their position. When you hear the explosion, you push through. They will be oriented toward me. You hit them from behind. And you? What happens to you when a dozen fighters turn their attention your way? I disappear. It is what I do. Briggs stared at her. In the filtered moonlight, his face looked older than his years, carved by decisions and their consequences. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her now. The liability he had tried to abandon on the ridge? Or something else? This is suicide, he said finally. No, suicide would be doing nothing while Morrison dies. This is mathematics. I am one operator. You have 4 who can still move, and 1 who cannot survive without extraction. The numbers are clear. Salcedo stepped forward. I will go with her. 2 shooters on the far side doubles our effectiveness. Negative. Vashon did not look at him. You're the only medic. Morrison needs you more than I do. Guess. The use of her name stopped her. Salcedo rarely used it, preferring call signs and ranks the way most operators did. The familiarity carried weight. Come back, he said. That is an order from someone who does not have the authority to give you orders. She almost smiled. Watch for my signal. The movement around the enemy camp took 15 minutes. 15 minutes of crawling through bamboo, avoiding the dry stalks that would crack underfoot, navigating by sound and instinct. The whispers of the valley covered her passage. Spirits or wind or whatever forces had earned this place its reputation. She positioned herself 70 meters from the camp, behind a fallen bamboo cluster that offered concealment and a clear throwing lane. Through her scope, she studied the fighters. They were relaxed, confident. Their weapons were stacked rather than ready. They did not expect contact. That would change. Vashon pulled the pin on the grenade and held the spoon for 3 seconds, cooking the fuse. Then she threw. The explosion shattered the night. The camp erupted in chaos, fighters scrambling for weapons, shouting, orienting toward the source of the blast. She saw 2 bodies on the ground, motionless. Others were wounded, crawling. Rugerus spoke. One of the standing fighters dropped. She worked the bolt, found another target, fired again. The bamboo around her shuddered with the report, but the valley's strange acoustics scattered the sound. The enemy could not pinpoint her position. From the far side of the camp, she heard the distinctive crack of American weapons. Briggs and his team had engaged. The blocking force was caught between 2 fires, their formation dissolving into individual survival. Vashon kept shooting. Each round found flesh. Each pull of the trigger reduced the enemy's numbers by 1. She counted her shots, tracking her dwindling ammunition with cold precision. 8 rounds remaining in Rougarou. Then 7. Then 6. The firefight lasted 90 seconds. When the last echo faded, 11 enemy fighters lay dead among the bamboo. The 12th had fled into the darkness, wounded and terrified. Let him run. His fear would spread faster than any bullet. Vachon moved to rejoin her team. She found them gathering weapons and ammunition from the fallen enemy, their movements quick and professional. Briggs looked up as she approached. 12 hostiles neutralized, she reported. One escaped, wounded. I am down to 5 rounds for the primary weapon. Briggs nodded slowly. His expression had changed again. Not warmth, not acceptance, but something that might have been the beginning of reassessment. You could have died, he said. We all could have died, Senior Chief. The difference is that now we have a chance. Morrison's stretcher had been fashioned from bamboo poles and torn fabric. Salcedo checked his vitals and gave a cautious thumbs up. Still breathing, still fighting, still a reason to keep moving. They pressed on through the valley of whispers, leaving the dead behind in the haunted darkness. 2 kilometers to the plantation. 2 kilometers through jungle that wanted to swallow them whole. Vachon took point again, her eyes scanning the shadows ahead. Somewhere out there, the enemy commander was learning that his blocking force had been destroyed. Somewhere out there, reinforcements were being redirected. The window of opportunity they had purchased with blood was already beginning to close. She moved faster. The bamboo gave way to primary jungle as they neared the valley's edge. The canopy closed overhead, blocking even the scattered moonlight. Vachon navigated by feel, by the slope of the ground, by the smell of water that told her they were approaching a stream that would lead them to the plantation. A sound reached her ears, distant but unmistakable. Helicopter rotors. She stopped, listened. The sound was coming from the east, moving in a search pattern. Enemy air support, hunting for the Americans who had shattered their ambush and slaughtered their blocking force. The jungle that had been their prison was now their only protection. She pressed on, leading her team deeper into the darkness, racing the hunters toward whatever waited at the plantation ruins. The helicopter passed overhead 3 times in 20 minutes. Each time, the team pressed themselves into the jungle floor, becoming part of the rot and the shadows while searchlights carved white paths through the canopy above. The light never found them, but the margin was measured in feet rather than meters. Vachon watched the aircraft bank toward the east on its 3rd pass. The pilot was good, methodical, covering ground in overlapping patterns that would eventually find them if they stayed still. Movement was risk. Stillness was death. The mathematics of survival had narrowed to impossible choices. Morrison's breathing had worsened. Salcedo worked over him with quiet desperation, adjusting bandages, checking vitals, doing everything possible with nothing available. The medic's hands were steady, but his eyes carried the knowledge that field medicine had limits. Morrison needed surgery. He needed blood. He needed things that existed 40 kilometers away at Firebase Coral and nowhere else. We have to keep moving, Vachon said. Briggs nodded. The gesture carried none of his earlier resistance. Somewhere in the last few hours, the senior chief had stopped fighting her assessments and started listening to them. She was not sure if that represented progress or simply the mathematics of desperation. The stream she had smelled earlier materialized from the darkness, a ribbon of black water cutting through the jungle floor. They followed it northwest, using the soft mud of the bank to muffle their footsteps. The plantation was close now. She could feel it in the changing texture of the jungle, the way secondary growth had begun to replace primary forest. Someone had cleared this land once, generations ago, and the jungle was still in the process of reclaiming it. A structure emerged from the shadows. Stone walls, half collapsed, covered in vines that had been growing for decades. The main house of the plantation, French colonial architecture reduced to skeleton and memory. Beyond it, she could make out the shapes of other buildings. Worker quarters, storage facilities. The infrastructure of exploitation left to rot when the colonizers fled. Kowalski moved forward to clear the main structure. He returned 2 minutes later with a status report delivered in hand signals. Empty, stable, defensible. They established Morrison in what had once been the main hall, a space where partial roof coverage would protect him from the elements. Salcedo immediately began a more thorough assessment, his pen light casting sharp shadows as he worked. The rest of the team secured the perimeter, identifying firing positions and escape routes. Vachon climbed to the second floor, where a collapsed wall offered a clear view of the approach from the east. She settled Rougarou on a pile of rubble and began scanning the jungle through her scope. 5 rounds, 5 chances to change the outcome of whatever was coming. Briggs found her there 20 minutes later. He moved quietly for a man his size, but she heard him on the stairs. She did not turn. "Morrison is stable," he said. "For now. Salcedo says he might last until dawn if we can get extraction. Firebase Coral knows we missed our scheduled contact. They will send a search element into this." Briggs gestured at the darkness beyond the walls. "They do not know what they will be flying into. Standard protocol is to wait for daylight and establish communication before risking additional assets. Then we hold until daylight." Briggs was quiet for a moment. She felt him studying her profile, weighing something he was not ready to say. "I have been doing this for 19 years, he said finally. "I have led men through situations that would break most people. I have made decisions that cost lives and decisions that save them. I thought I understood what this job required." She waited. "On that ridge," he continued, "when I told you to hold position, I knew what I was doing. I knew the risk I was creating. I told myself it was tactical, that your position offered the best overwatch, that the mission required the distribution of assets." The words hung in the humid air. Below, she could hear Salcedo murmuring to Morrison, keeping the wounded man conscious through sheer force of conversation. "It was not tactical," Briggs said. "I wanted you to fail. I wanted the mission to prove that you did not belong here. That women in the teams were a mistake the brass had made, and that the field would correct." Vachon turned to look at him. In the darkness, his face was a map of shadows and regret. "I know," she said. "You knew. Senior Chief, I've spent my entire career being tested by men who wanted me to fail. I learned to recognize the shape of it before I finished boot camp. You were not subtle." Briggs exhaled, a sound that carried the weight of years. "My daughter," he said. "Elena. She wanted to be a pilot. Fighter jets. She had the scores, the reflexes, everything. But she was small, and the ejection seat parameters had not been updated for smaller frames. They told her she did not qualify. She went anyway. Different program, different aircraft. Less safe. What happened? Training accident. Mechanical failure during a night exercise. She did not eject in time." Briggs paused. "They told me the parameters exist for a reason, that the standards protect people. I believe them. I needed to believe them because the alternative was that my daughter died for nothing, that she died because the system would not make room for her." Vachon understood then. The hatred in his eyes had never been about her. It had been about a ghost he could not stop seeing. "When I look at you," Briggs said, "I see her. I see what she might have become if she had survived. And I hate it. I hate that you are here and she is not. I hate that you are proving that women can do this job, because that means the system that killed her was wrong. That means she died because of a lie." She let the silence stretch. Words felt inadequate for the wound he had just exposed. "Your daughter died because she refused to accept limits that other people set for her," Vachon said finally. "She died being exactly who she was meant to be. That is not nothing, Senior Chief. That is everything." Briggs looked at her. Something in his expression cracked. Not broken, but shifted, realigned. "I left you on that ridge to die." "Yes. And you saved us anyway." "I did not save you for your sake. I saved you because those men down there are my team. Because Morrison has a wife in San Diego who is expecting their first child. Because Salcedo sends half his paycheck to his mother every month. Because Kowalski has a little sister who thinks he is a hero. I saved you because that is what we do. We save each other, even when we do not deserve it." The radio on her vest crackled. Enemy chatter, voices she had been monitoring since she took the captured unit. She held up a hand for silence and listened. The words came fast, urgent. Coordinates. Movement orders. A timeline measured in minutes. "They found us," she said. "Multiple elements converging. 20 minutes, maybe less. Briggs was already moving toward the stairs. How many? She listened to the overlapping transmissions, counting voices, estimating unit sizes. 40, maybe 50. They are bringing everyone. Vachon checked Rougarou. 5 rounds. Her sidearm. 1 remaining grenade. 50 enemies. For combat-effective operators. 1 dying man who could not be moved. The mathematics had finally reached 0. The plantation became a fortress in the 15 minutes they had left. Kowalski rigged the eastern approach with tripwires fashioned from vine and the last of their explosive charges. Salcedo positioned Morrison behind a stone wall that would stop rifle rounds and placed himself beside the wounded man with a borrowed weapon. Briggs took the ground floor, covering the main entrance with fields of fire that would funnel attackers into kill zones. Vachon remained on the second floor. Her elevated position offered the longest sight lines, and Rougarou's remaining rounds would matter most at distance. She had redistributed her sidearm ammunition to the team below, keeping only a single magazine for herself. 15 rounds for when the rifle ran dry. 15 rounds between her and whatever came after. The jungle had gone quiet. No insects, no birds. Even the wind had died. The silence was its own warning, the forest holding its breath before violence. She thought of Darnell. Not the moment of his death, but the morning before, when they had shared coffee on a rooftop in Kandahar and watched the sun rise over mountains that had swallowed armies for centuries. He had asked her what she wanted to do after the Navy. She had not had an answer. "I want to teach," he had said. "Kids who grew up like me, in neighborhoods where the only futures anyone shows you are corners and cages. I want to show them there is more, that they can be more." He never got the chance. A sniper's bullet from a building they had cleared twice took him before noon. She had held him while he died, felt his blood soaking into her uniform, watched the light leave his eyes. Some debts could never be repaid, but they could be honored. Movement at the tree line. She pressed her eye to the scope and watched the enemy emerge from the jungle. They came in disciplined formation, fire teams leapfrogging forward, covering each other's advance. These were not militia. These were soldiers, trained and equipped, and led by someone who understood tactics. She found their commander through her scope. A man in his 50s, compact and weathered, directing his forces with hand signals that spoke of decades of experience. He wore no rank insignia, but his bearing announced his authority. The soldiers around him moved with the precision of men who had followed him through other battles, other victories. Colon Wen Du Pham. She did not know his name, but she recognized what he was. A professional, a warrior, the kind of enemy who made survival a matter of luck as much as skill. She tracked him through the scope. The range was 800 meters, well within Rougarou's capability. 1 round would end his command, throw his forces into confusion by precious minutes. Her finger rested on the trigger. She did not fire. Killing him now would start the battle on their terms. His soldiers would go to ground, establish positions, bring their full numbers to bear in a coordinated assault. But if she waited, let them commit to their approach, she could break their momentum at the critical moment. 1 shot at the right time was worth 10 at the wrong time. Patience. Her grandfather's voice in her memory. The gator does not chase. The gator waits. The enemy advance continued. 200 meters from the perimeter. 150. 100. Kowalski's tripwire detonated. The explosion tore through the lead element, dropping 3 soldiers and scattering the formation. Before the echo faded, Briggs opened fire from the ground floor, his weapon a metronome of controlled bursts. The enemy soldiers dove for cover, returning fire, their bullets chewing into the plantation's stone walls. Vachon found her first target, a soldier rising to throw a grenade. Rougarou barked, and he collapsed, the grenade falling from his hand and rolling harmlessly into the underbrush. 4 rounds remaining. The battle found its rhythm. Enemy fire poured into the plantation from 3 directions, a storm of lead that filled the air with stone dust and the scream of ricochets. Briggs moved between positions, never staying long enough to be targeted, his fire discipline keeping the attackers pinned. Kowalski worked the eastern flank, his rifle speaking in short, precise sentences. Through her scope, Vachon watched Colonel Pham directing reinforcements. He was moving his forces to encircle the plantation, extending his lines to cut off any possibility of retreat. A strangler's grip tightening by degrees. She shifted her aim. A machine gun team was setting up on a small rise, their weapon capable of suppressing the entire ground floor. She fired. The gunner slumped over his weapon. His assistant reached for the trigger, and she fired again. 2 rounds remaining. The enemy adapted. They had identified her position now, and rifle fire began to concentrate on the second floor. Stone chips sprayed her face as rounds impacted the wall beside her. She rolled to a new position, seeking cover behind a collapsed beam. Below, she heard Salcedo shout. Morrison's vitals were crashing. The medic was fighting a battle of his own, trying to keep a dying man alive while bullets tore the air around him. Briggs's voice came over the radio. They are massing for a push on the north side. I cannot hold them alone. Kowalski responded. East is clear for now. Moving to support. The north wall. Vachon calculated angles, distances, possibilities. From her position, she could see the enemy forces gathering for their assault. 30 men at least, preparing to rush the breach that their sustained fire had created in the plantation's defenses. Colonel Pham stood among them. Calm, confident, ready to watch his soldiers finish what the ambush had started. She had 2 rounds, 30 targets. The mathematics were impossible. But mathematics had been impossible since the ridge. And she was still here. Vachon steadied her breathing, found her center, let the chaos below fade into white noise. The assault began. Soldiers surged toward the north wall, screaming, firing, a wave of violence meant to overwhelm through sheer momentum. She fired her first round. Colonel Pham's head snapped back, and he crumpled without a sound. The wave faltered. Soldiers looked back, saw their commander fall, hesitated in that crucial moment between courage and doubt. She fired her last round. The soldier who had stepped forward to take command dropped beside his colonel. Rougarou was empty, but the damage was done. The assault collapsed into confusion. Soldiers retreating to the tree line, their coordination shattered by the loss of leadership. Briggs and Kowalski poured fire into their withdrawal, turning retreat into rout. Silence fell over the plantation. Not peace, but pause. The enemy would regroup. They would find new leadership. They would come again. But not yet. Not in this moment. Vachon set down her rifle and drew her sidearm. 15 rounds. Whatever came next, she would face it with what she had. From below, Salcedo's voice rose through the gun smoke and dust. He is stable. Morrison is stable. I do not know how, but he is still fighting. She closed her eyes. Let herself feel something that might have been hope. Then the radio crackled with a new voice. American. Firebase Coral's frequency. Any station, this is Warhorse 6. We have your position. QRF inbound, 15 minutes. Mark your location with IR strobe. Confirm receipt. Briggs responded, his voice cracking with exhaustion and relief. Warhorse 6, this is Sierra Element. Position marked. We have 1 critical casualty, multiple wounded. Hostiles in the area, strength unknown. We will hold. 15 minutes. Vachon opened her eyes and raised her sidearm toward the tree line. They only had to survive 15 more minutes. 15 minutes might as well have been 15 hours. Vachon watched the tree line through the iron sights of her pistol, tracking movement in the shadows where the enemy was regrouping. They had lost their commander, but soldiers did not stop being dangerous when leadership fell. Sometimes they became more dangerous, driven by rage and the need to avenge. She counted muzzle flashes during the last assault, cross-referenced with the bodies visible in the clearing. Estimated at least 30 fighters still combat effective. 30 against 4, with one of those 4 bleeding out on a stone floor and another refusing to leave his side. The mathematics had not improved, but the timeline had changed. 15 minutes was survivable. 15 minutes was a promise she could keep. Kowalski appeared at the top of the stairs, his face streaked with soot and someone else's blood. He moved to a position at the opposite window, covering the western approach. Briggs sent me up, he said. Figures you could use another rifle. She nodded toward the tree line. They are massing again. Looks like they are splitting into two elements. Pincer movement. Smart. Take out the sniper nest first, then roll up the ground floor. That would be my play. Kowalski checked his magazine. Half full. Maybe 12 rounds. You know, when I heard we were getting a female operator on the team, I had my doubts. Nothing personal. Just, biology. Physics. All that. And now I'm thinking biology and physics do not mean much when someone shoots like you do. She almost smiled. Flattery will not make me share my ammunition. Worth a shot. The joke landed in the space between them, a moment of connection forged in the particular intimacy of people who expected to die together. Vachon had experienced it before, this strange closeness that combat created. Bonds built in minutes that peacetime could not replicate in years. Movement at the tree line. She raised her pistol, tracking a shadow that resolved into a soldier sprinting between positions. Too far for an accurate shot with a handgun. She let him go. They are probing, Kowalski observed. Testing our response times. Let them probe. Every second they spend testing is a second closer to extraction. The enemy seemed to reach the same conclusion. The probing stopped. The shadows at the tree line grew denser as fighters consolidated into assault formations. Here they come, Kowalski said. The attack came from two directions simultaneously. Western element first. A dozen soldiers rushing the collapsed wall that Kowalski covered. He met them with controlled fire, each burst dropping a target, but they kept coming, accepting losses to close the distance. Eastern element 3 seconds later. Vachon fired into the mass of bodies surging toward her position, the pistol bucking in her hands. A soldier fell. Another stumbled. But there were too many, moving too fast, and her weapon held too few rounds. Reloading, she called out, dropping behind cover to swap magazines. In that moment, a grenade sailed through the window. Time stretched. She saw the explosive tumble through the air, watched it bounce once on the stone floor, calculated the blast radius against her position. No time to run. No cover sufficient to survive. Kowalski moved. He threw himself onto the grenade, wrapping his body around it, becoming a shield of flesh and bone. The detonation was muffled, contained. Kowalski's body absorbed the blast that would have killed them both. Vachon screamed. The sound tore from her throat before she could stop it, a raw animal cry of fury and grief. She rose from cover and fired into the soldiers climbing through the window, emptying her magazine into bodies at point-blank range. 3 fell. 4. The pistol locked open on an empty chamber. The 5th soldier raised his rifle. A shot cracked from the stairs. The soldier dropped. Briggs stood at the top of the stairwell, his weapon smoking. "Get down here," he shouted. "Position is compromised." She grabbed Kowalski's rifle from where it had fallen. He was still breathing. Shallow, wet breaths that bubbled with blood. The grenade had torn through his vest, his chest, his abdomen. He looked up at her with eyes that were already beginning to fade. "Did it work?" he asked. His voice was a whisper. "It worked. You saved me. Good. Tell my sister. Tell her I was not scared." She wanted to stay, wanted to hold his hand while he left. But Briggs was pulling her toward the stairs, and the enemy was still coming, and Kowalski's sacrifice meant nothing if she died beside him. "I will tell her," she promised. Then she was moving, descending the stairs with Briggs, leaving Kowalski to die alone in the room he had defended with his life. The ground floor had become a fortress within a fortress. Salcedo had barricaded the main hall with fallen stones and broken furniture, creating a final defensive position around Morrison's stretcher. The medic looked up as they entered, his face asking the question his voice could not. "Kowalski," Briggs said. The word was enough. Salcedo closed his eyes, crossed himself, then raised his weapon toward the door. "How long?" he asked. Vachon checked her watch. 8 minutes. The enemy reached the ground floor 30 seconds later. They came through windows and doorways, a flood of bodies that crashed against the barricade like waves against rocks. Vachon fired Kowalski's rifle until it ran dry, then drew her empty pistol and used it as a club. Briggs fought beside her, his movements slowing as exhaustion and wounds took their toll. Salcedo held his position over Morrison, refusing to abandon his patient even as the perimeter collapsed. A soldier broke through. Vachon caught his rifle barrel, redirected it past her head, drove her knee into his stomach. They grappled in the darkness, struggling for control of the weapon. He was stronger. She was faster. Her thumb found his eye and pressed until he screamed and released the rifle. She turned the weapon on its owner, fired, swung toward the next threat. The plantation had become a slaughterhouse. Bodies everywhere, American and enemy tangled together in the intimate violence of close combat. Blood made the stones slick. Smoke filled the air. And still they fought, because stopping meant dying, and dying meant failing the men who had already given everything. Vachon felt a round punch through her shoulder. The impact spun her sideways, dropping her against the barricade. She tried to raise her weapon, but her arm would not respond. Nerve damage. Muscle torn. The rifle slipped from her fingers. A soldier stood over her. His face was young, barely older than a teenager. His hands trembled as he aimed his weapon at her chest. She met his eyes, did not look away. If death was coming, she would watch it arrive. The soldier hesitated, and then the night turned to daylight. Helicopter searchlights blazed through every window, flooding the plantation with blinding white illumination. The roar of rotors drowned out all other sound. A voice boomed from speakers overhead, commanding everyone to drop their weapons, declaring that American forces had the building surrounded. The young soldier looked up at the lights, looked back at Vachon. Then he dropped his rifle and raised his hands. Around the room, other enemy fighters did the same. The fight drained out of them as quickly as it had begun, survival instinct overriding duty. Vachon lay against the barricade, bleeding from her shoulder, surrounded by the dead and the surrendering. They had held. Kowalski had not died for nothing. The medevac helicopter lifted off from the plantation courtyard at 0517, carrying Morrison and Vachon toward Firebase Coral. She watched the ruins shrink below, the stone walls now crawling with American soldiers securing the site and processing prisoners. Somewhere in that chaos, Kowalski's body was being zipped into a black bag for the journey home. A medic worked on her shoulder, cutting away fabric, cleaning the wound, applying pressure that sent white fire through her nervous system. She did not flinch. Pain was just information. Information could be processed later. Briggs sat across from her in the helicopter's bay. He had refused evacuation, insisting he was combat effective, but the flight surgeon had overruled him. Minor shrapnel wounds to his legs. Possible concussion. Nothing life-threatening, but nothing that belonged in the field either. They did not speak. The rotor noise made conversation difficult, but that was not the reason for their silence. Words felt inadequate for what had passed between them in the last 12 hours. Some experiences existed beyond language. Morrison's vitals had stabilized during the flight. Salcedo's field work had kept him alive long enough for proper medical intervention, and the medevac team had continued that work with the resources that the jungle had denied them. He would need surgery, weeks of recovery, but he would live. His wife would not become a widow. His unborn child would know its father. That was worth something. That was worth everything. Firebase Coral appeared on the horizon as the sun began to rise. The compound a geometric scar in the endless green of the jungle. Vachon watched the light spread across the canopy, painting the world in shades of gold and amber. Beautiful. The jungle was beautiful. It had tried to kill her, and it was still beautiful. The helicopter touched down on the medical pad. Organized chaos erupted around them. Stretcher teams rushing to extract Morrison, medics guiding Vachon toward the field hospital. She walked under her own power, refusing the wheelchair they offered. Walking meant she was still operational. Walking meant she had not been broken. The hospital was a canvas tent that smelled of antiseptic and fear. They placed her on a cot beside a curtained area where surgeons were already working on Morrison. A doctor examined her shoulder, announced that the bullet had passed through cleanly, missing the artery by centimeters. Lucky, he called it. She did not feel lucky. Master Chief Yusuf Okonkwo found her there 2 hours later. The senior enlisted man at Firebase Coral was a legend in the teams. 26 years of service written in the scars on his hands and the gray in his close-cropped hair. He had known Darnell, had written one of the recommendation letters that helped her qualify for sniper school. Chief Vachon, he said, pulling a chair beside her cot. You look like you went through hell. Just the suburbs, Master Chief. Okonkwo did not smile. I have been reading the after-action reports. Briggs submitted his account an hour ago. He paused. It is not what I expected. She turned her head to look at him. What did you expect? I expected excuses, justifications, the kind of report that buries mistakes under operational necessity and distributes blame across convenient targets. Okonkwo met her eyes. That is not what he wrote. What did he write? He wrote that he deliberately positioned you on the ridge to isolate you from the team, that he ignored your tactical assessments because he did not trust your judgment, that his decisions directly contributed to the ambush and the deaths of Hendricks and Morrison. He paused again. He wrote that you disobeyed direct orders and that your disobedience saved every surviving member of the team. Vachon stared at the canvas ceiling. She had expected many things from Briggs. Honesty was not among them. He also wrote, Okonkwo continued, that he is recommending you for the Silver Star, for actions above and beyond the call of duty in the face of enemy contact. She closed her eyes. The Silver Star, the same medal that Darnell had been posthumously awarded, the same recognition that marked operators who had faced impossible odds and emerged through some combination of skill and grace. I do not want a medal, she said. I want Kowalski back. I want Hendricks back. I want to go back to that ridge and make different choices that end with everyone coming home. I know. Okonkwo's voice was gentle. But that is not how this works. We cannot change what happened. We can only decide what it means. What does it mean, Master Chief? It means that when everything went wrong, you did what needed to be done. It means that 4 men are alive because you refused to accept the situation you were given. It means that the next woman who tries to qualify for the teams will have your record to point to when someone tells her she does not belong. Vachon opened her eyes. She had not thought about it that way, had not considered that her survival might matter beyond her own life. There will be an investigation, Okonkwo said. Briggs's admission guarantees that. The command will want to understand how this mission went wrong and who bears responsibility. You will be asked to testify. I understand. What will you say? She considered the question. Briggs had tried to kill her, had left her to die on a ridge while her team walked into an ambush. Every instinct told her to bury him, to let the investigation destroy the career of the man who had nearly destroyed her. But she also remembered the conversation in the plantation. His daughter, his grief, the way hatred could metastasize from loss until it poisoned everything it touched. I will tell the truth, she said finally. All of it. What he did and why he did it. What I did and why I did it. And I will tell them that in the end, when it mattered most, he fought beside me. He bled beside me. He helped me hold that line until rescue came. That is generous. That is accurate. She met his eyes. Being accurate about people does not mean you have to destroy them. Okonkwo studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly, something like respect settling into his expression. Darnell used to talk about you, he said. After Kandahar, when they were processing his effects, I found letters he had written to his mother. He mentioned you in several of them. He said you were the most patient person he had ever met, that you saw things other people missed because you were willing to wait for them to reveal themselves. She felt tears threatening. Push them down. Darnell had been gone for 2 years, but the wound was still fresh enough to bleed. He also said you were stubborn as hell and twice as mean when you needed to be. Okonkwo almost smiled. I'm starting to think he was right about that, too. A commotion at the hospital entrance drew their attention. Salcedo pushed through the canvas flap, his uniform still stained with Morrison's blood, his face carrying news that could not wait. He is out of surgery, the medic announced. They got the bleeding stopped. Doctors say he is going to make it. Vachon let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Morrison was going to live. The mission had cost them Hendricks. Kowalski nearly cost them Morrison and herself. But in the end, Against odds that should have been impossible, they had brought people home. She looked at Okonkwo, at Salcedo, at the canvas walls of a hospital tent in a country that had been swallowing soldiers for generations. "When does the investigation start?" she asked. "Tomorrow." Okonkwo rose from his chair. "Get some rest, Chief. You have earned it." Rest. She was not sure she remembered how, but she closed her eyes anyway and let the exhaustion pull her down into darkness. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was of Kowalski's face in the moonlight, asking her to tell his sister he was not scared. She would keep that promise. She would keep all of them. The investigation convened in a prefabricated building that served as Firebase Coral's administrative center. 3 officers sat behind a folding table, their uniforms crisp, their expressions carefully neutral. Captain Elaine Whitmore from JAG, Commander Samuel Reese from Naval Special Warfare Command, and presiding over the panel, Rear Admiral Catherine Zhou, whose reputation for fairness was matched only by her reputation for thoroughness. Vachon sat in a metal chair facing them, her wounded arm in a sling, her dress uniform borrowed from a supply sergeant who had found something close to her size. She had slept for 14 hours after the medevac, dreamless and deep, and woken to find that the world had continued turning without her permission. "Chief Petty Officer Vachon," Admiral Zhou began, "you understand that this is a formal inquiry into the events of Operation Green Serpent. Your testimony will be recorded and may be used in subsequent disciplinary proceedings. Do you understand?" "Yes, Admiral. Please state for the record your account of the mission, beginning with a pre-operation briefing." Vachon spoke for 47 minutes. She described the briefing, the insertion, the patrol through the jungle. She explained her warnings about enemy sign and Briggs's dismissal of her assessment. She recounted being positioned on the ridge, the order to hold position, the growing distance between herself and the team. When she reached the ambush, Admiral Zhou raised a hand. "Chief Vachon," the Admiral said, "Senior Chief Briggs has testified that he deliberately isolated you from the team. He claims this decision was motivated by personal bias rather than tactical necessity. Do you concur with that assessment?" The question hung in the air. 3 careers balanced on her answer. Briggs, who had tried to kill her. Her own, which could be tainted by association with a disgraced commander. And the nameless women who would come after, whose paths would be shaped by how this moment was recorded. "I concur that Senior Chief Briggs positioned me on the ridge with the intention of limiting my participation in the mission," Vachon said carefully. "I believe his judgment was compromised by factors unrelated to my operational capability." "What factors?" She hesitated. This was the line she had promised herself she would not cross. Briggs's daughter was his story to tell, not hers. "Personal factors, Admiral. I do not believe it is my place to elaborate on the Senior Chief's private circumstances." Commander Reese leaned forward. "Chief Vachon, you are aware that Senior Chief Briggs has already disclosed the nature of these personal factors in his own testimony?" She was not aware. Briggs had told them about Elena, had stripped himself bare before the panel in a way she had not anticipated. "Then you understand," Reese continued, "that we are asking you to confirm what has already been entered into the record. Did Senior Chief Briggs's feelings regarding women in special operations contribute to his decision to isolate you?" "Yes, Commander, they did." Captain Whitmore made a note on her tablet. "And yet, according to your account, you disobeyed Senior Chief Briggs's direct order to hold position and engaged enemy forces without authorization." "That is correct. You understand that such disobedience, regardless of outcome, constitutes a violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice?" Vachon met the captain's eyes. "I understand that following Senior Chief Briggs's order would have resulted in the death of every member of the team. I made a judgment call. I would make the same call again." Admiral Zhou studied her for a long moment. The silence stretched until it became its own kind of testimony. "Chief Vachon," the Admiral said finally, "this panel has reviewed the tactical data from Operation Green Serpent. We have examined the enemy disposition, the ammunition expenditure, the casualty reports. We have interviewed the surviving team members and analyzed the timeline of events." She paused. The evidence suggests that your actions directly prevented the complete annihilation of the special operations element. Do you have anything to add to that assessment? Only that I did not act alone, Admiral. Petty Officer First Class Kowalski sacrificed his life to protect me during the final assault. Petty Officer First Class Salcedo kept Petty Officer Morrison alive through extraordinary medical intervention. Senior Chief Briggs fought beside me at the plantation when the enemy breached our perimeter. Whatever recognition comes from this mission should be shared among everyone who held that line, including Senior Chief Briggs. The question was a trap. Vachon recognized it, understood that the panel was testing her objectivity, measuring her capacity for fairness against her justification for grievance. Including Senior Chief Briggs, she confirmed. His decisions before the ambush were wrong. His conduct during the defense of the plantation was exemplary. Both things are true. Admiral Zhou exchanged glances with her fellow officers. Something passed between them, a silent communication that Vachon could not interpret. Chief Vachon, the Admiral said, this panel will recess to deliberate. You will be informed of our findings within 48 hours. In the meantime, you are restricted to base and relieved of operational duty pending medical clearance. Do you have any questions? No? Admitted. Then you are dismissed. Vachon rose, saluted, and walked out of the building into sunlight that felt like absolution. She did not know what the panel would decide. Did not know if her career would survive the intersection of disobedience and heroism that had defined Operation Green Serpent. But she knew she had told the truth. All of it. The ugly parts and the noble parts and the complicated parts that resisted easy categorization. Briggs was waiting outside. He sat on a concrete barrier near the building entrance, his own uniform rumpled from hours of testimony, his face carrying the exhaustion of a man who had confronted his worst self and found no comfort in the confession. She stopped a few feet away. Neither spoke. I told them everything, he said finally. About Elena. About why I did what I did. About what you did to save us. His voice cracked slightly. I do not expect forgiveness. I'm not sure I deserve it. Vachon considered her response. Forgiveness was a word that people used when they wanted closure, when they wanted the messiness of human failure wrapped in a bow and set aside. But some things could not be set aside. Some wounds left scars that ached when the weather changed. I'm not offering forgiveness, she said. What you did on that ridge was wrong. It was wrong for reasons that go beyond tactics and reach into something uglier. You know that. I know, but I'm also not offering condemnation. She stepped closer. You lost your daughter. You lost her to a system that would not make room for her, and you have been fighting that loss ever since. I understand grief. I understand how it can twist you into someone you do not recognize. Briggs looked up at her. His eyes were wet. What are you offering, then? The truth, she said. You were wrong. You try to make it right. Those are the facts. What you do with them is your choice. She turned and walked away, leaving him on the concrete barrier with the weight of his choices and the possibility, however fragile, of something that might eventually look like redemption. Behind her, the sun climbed higher over Firebase Coral, burning away the morning mist and promising a heat that would make the jungle steam. Tomorrow, the panel would deliver its verdict. Tonight, she would write a letter to Kowalski's sister. The rest would take care of itself. The letter took 3 hours to write. Vachon sat in her temporary quarters, a small room with a cot and a desk and a window that looked out over the helicopter pad. She had started the letter 7 times, crumpling each attempt into the growing pile beside her chair. The words refused to arrange themselves into anything that felt adequate. Dear Miss Kowalski felt too formal. Dear Amanda felt too familiar for someone she had never met. She finally settled on a simple salutation and let the rest flow from there. Your brother asked me to tell you something. In his final moments, when he knew what was coming, he wanted you to know that he was not scared. She paused, her pen hovering over the paper. The statement was true. Kowalski had said those exact words. But truth and completeness were not the same thing. I want you to understand what that meant. Your brother threw himself onto a grenade to save my life. He had less than 2 seconds to make that choice. Most people would have frozen. Most people would have run. Jake did neither. He moved toward the danger because that was who he was. Because protecting others was more important to him than protecting himself. The pen moved across the page, filling line after line with details that a sister deserved to know. How Kowalski had made her laugh in the moments before the final assault. How he had covered her position when the enemy broke through. How his sacrifice had given her the seconds she needed to survive until rescue arrived. She did not write about the sound his body had made when the grenade detonated. Did not describe the way his blood had fell on her hands as she knelt beside him. Some truths were too heavy to share with someone who would carry them forever. I cannot tell you that his death was fair. It was not. I cannot tell you that it served some greater purpose that makes the loss easier to bear. I do not believe that. What I can tell you is that your brother died as he lived, putting others before himself. And I can tell you that I will carry him with me for the rest of my life. Not as a burden, but as a standard. A reminder of what courage looks like when everything else has been stripped away. She signed the letter, folded it carefully, and placed it in an envelope. The address was one Kowalski had mentioned during their conversation in the plantation. His sister lived in Ohio, in a small town near Cleveland where their parents had raised them before a car accident took both mother and father in the same night. Amanda was all the family Jake had left. Now she had no one. A knock at her door interrupted the silence. Salcedo stood in the hallway, his expression carrying news she could not yet read. "Panel is ready," he said. "They are asking for you." She tucked the letter into her pocket and followed him across the compound. The administrative building looked different in daylight, less imposing, more like what it was, a temporary structure holding temporary people making decisions that would echo long after the canvas and plywood had rotted away. Admiral Joe sat alone behind the table. The other panel members had departed, leaving only the senior officer to deliver the verdict. Vachon stood at attention, her heart steady despite the uncertainty. "At ease, Chief." The Admiral gestured to a chair. "Seat." She sat. "This panel has completed its review of Operation Green Serpent." Admiral Joe opened a folder and glanced at the contents, though Vachon suspected she had already memorized every word. "Our findings are as follows." The Admiral's voice took on a formal cadence, the language of military justice that could end careers with a sentence or resurrect them with a phrase. Senior Chief Harlan Briggs has been found to have exercised poor judgment in the positioning of assets during the initial phase of the operation. His decisions, motivated by personal bias, directly contributed to the team's vulnerability during the enemy ambush. He has been formally reprimanded and will be reassigned to a non-operational billet pending review of his continued service. Vachon absorbed the information. A reprimand was serious. Reassignment more so. But Briggs would not face court-martial, would not lose his pension, would have the chance to salvage something from the wreckage of his choices. Chief Petty Officer Kestrel Vachon, the Admiral continued, has been found to have disobeyed a direct order during combat operations. Here it was, the moment that would define the rest of her career. However, the Admiral said, this panel also finds that Chief Vachon's disobedience was justified by circumstances that rendered the original order tactically unsound. Her subsequent actions demonstrated exceptional courage, initiative, and combat effectiveness under extreme duress. It is the recommendation of this panel that no disciplinary action be taken and that Chief Vachon be recognized for her extraordinary performance. Vachon felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief exactly. Something closer to validation. The system had looked at what happened and chosen truth over convenience. Admiral Joe closed the folder and leaned forward. "Off the record, Chief." The shift in tone signaled a different kind of conversation. Vachon waited. "I have been in the Navy for 31 years. I have seen good men make terrible decisions and terrible men stumble into good ones. I have watched careers end over trivialities and survive scandals that should have destroyed them. What I saw in your testimony, and in Senior Chief Briggs's testimony, was something I do not see often." "What is that, Admiral?" "Honesty." Joe's expression softened slightly. "You had every right to bury him. Every justification. and he had every incentive to deflect blame, to minimize his role, to protect himself at your expense. Neither of you did that. You both chose the harder path. I told the truth, Admiral. That is all. That is never all. Zhou stood, signaling that the formal portion of the meeting had concluded. The truth is the hardest thing there is. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding it. She extended her hand. Vachon rose and shook it. Your Silver Star recommendation has been approved, the Admiral said. There will be a ceremony when you return stateside. I expect you to be there. Yes, Admiral. And Chief. Zhou held her gaze. What you did out there, what you survived, that is going to follow you. Some days it will feel like a weight. Other days it will feel like wings. Both of those feelings are correct. Vachon nodded. She understood. The jungle would never fully release her. Kowalski's face would appear in quiet moments for the rest of her life. The sound of grenades and gunfire would echo in dreams she could not control. But she would also carry the sunrise over the canopy. The moment when the helicopters appeared, the knowledge that she had been tested beyond any reasonable limit and had not broken. Thank you, Admiral. She walked out of the building and into an afternoon that felt newly made. Salcedo waited by the door, his question answered by her expression. Cleared, she said. No action. He exhaled. And Briggs? Reprimanded. Reassigned. Not destroyed. Salcedo nodded slowly. That seems about right. They walked together toward the medical building where Morrison was recovering. The compound bustled with activity around them, soldiers and support staff, moving through the business of maintaining a presence in a country that had never wanted them. What now? Salcedo asked. Now I deliver a letter. She touched the envelope in her pocket. Then I go home. Then I figure out what comes next. Any ideas? A few. She thought of Darnell's dream, teaching kids from neighborhoods like his, of her grandfather's patience, of Kowalski's sister receiving a letter that would break her heart and put it back together in a new shape. Maybe it is time to start giving back what I have learned. Salcedo smiled. The teams could use more instructors like you. Maybe, or maybe something else. She looked up at the sky, clear and blue and impossibly large. I have time to figure it out. For the first time in days, that felt true. The flight home took 19 hours with 2 layovers. Vachon spent most of it staring out windows at clouds and ocean and the sprawling geometry of cities seen from 30,000 feet. Her shoulder ached despite the medication, a persistent reminder that bodies healed on their own schedule regardless of what the mind demanded. She landed in San Diego on a Tuesday afternoon. The terminal was crowded with travelers who moved through their ordinary lives without knowing that the woman in civilian clothes walking among them had killed 17 people in a single night. That was the strange mathematics of coming home. The world continued as if nothing had changed while everything inside her had been rearranged. A car waited outside baggage claim. Navy sedan, driver in uniform, the quiet efficiency of an institution that took care of its own when cameras were watching. She climbed into the back seat and gave the driver an address that was not her apartment. The Kowalski house sat on a quiet street in a suburb east of Cleveland. Vachon had flown there directly after landing in San Diego, catching a connecting flight that added 6 more hours to her journey. She could have mailed the letter, could have called, but some debts required presence. Some words needed to be delivered by the hands that had held the dying. Amanda Kowalski answered the door on the second knock. She was younger than Vachon had expected, mid-20s, with her brother's eyes and a wariness that suggested she had already received official notification. The Navy moved fast with casualty affairs. Families rarely learned the details from anyone who had been there. Chief Vachon, Amanda said, "They told me you might come. May I come in?" The house was small and tidy, filled with photographs that traced 2 lives from childhood to adulthood. Vachon saw Jake in Little League uniform, Jake at prom, Jake in dress blues at his graduation from basic training. The images stopped abruptly 3 years ago. After that, the operational tempo had left no time for formal portraits. They sat in a living room that smelled faintly of coffee and grief. Amanda perched on the edge of a chair, her hands folded in her lap, her composure a thin shell over something vast and broken. Vachon pulled the letter from her jacket and held it out. Your brother asked me to give you a message. I wrote it down so you would have his exact words. Amanda took the envelope but did not open it. She stared at the paper as if it might bite her. They told me he died saving someone, she said. They did not tell me who. He saved me. The words landed in the silence between them. Amanda looked up, her eyes searching Vachon's face for something she could not name. Tell me, she said. Tell me what happened. Not the official version, the real one. So Vachon told her. She described the plantation, the assault, the grenade that had sailed through the window. She explained how Jake had moved without hesitation, how his body had absorbed the blast that would have killed them both. She repeated his final words exactly as he had spoken them, watching Amanda's face crumble and rebuild with each sentence. When she finished, the room was quiet except for the sound of Amanda crying. Not the theatrical sobs of movies, but the deep, silent weeping of someone whose world had been permanently altered. He talked about you, Amanda said finally. In his letters, he said there was a sniper on the team who never missed, who was quieter than anyone he had ever met. He said he trusted you more than anyone except me. Vachon felt her own eyes burning. She had not known, had not realized that her presence had meant something to Kowalski beyond professional respect. I trusted him too, she said. I wish I had told him that before the end. Amanda opened the letter then. Read it slowly, her lips moving slightly with each word. When she finished, she folded it carefully and pressed it against her chest. He was not scared, she whispered. No, he was not. They sat together in the quiet house while the afternoon light shifted through the windows. Vachon did not try to fill the silence with comfort, did not offer platitudes about sacrifice and honor and the nobility of service. She simply stayed present and available, letting Amanda grieve in whatever way she needed. After an hour, Amanda spoke again. What happens now? For you, I mean. I go back to San Diego. There is a ceremony in 2 weeks. Then I find out what comes next. Will you stay in the Navy? Vachon considered the question. It was the same one she had been asking herself since the helicopter lifted off from the plantation. I do not know, she admitted. Part of me wants to keep doing this work. It is what I am good at, what I was built for. But another part of me wonders if there is something else I should be doing. Something that honors what Jake gave without requiring more people to die. Amanda nodded slowly. Jake used to say the same thing. He told me once that he loved the teams, but he was not sure he wanted to do it forever. He said maybe someday he would teach, help other people find what he had found. Your brother sounds like someone I knew. Another operator who dreamed of teaching. He did not get the chance either. Maybe you could do it for both of them. The suggestion landed with unexpected weight. Vachon had been circling the idea since her conversation with Salcedo, but hearing it from Amanda transformed abstract possibility into something closer to obligation. Maybe I could, she said. The visit lasted another 2 hours. They talked about Jake's childhood, his obsession with action movies, the time he had tried to teach Amanda to shoot and ended up putting a hole in their father's tool shed. They laughed and cried and passed photographs back and forth, building a bridge between the woman who had watched him die and the woman who had watched him live. When Vachon finally rose to leave, Amanda walked her to the door. Thank you, Amanda said, for coming, for telling me the truth, for being there when he needed someone. I wish I could have done more. You did enough. Amanda hugged her then, a fierce embrace that carried the weight of transferred grief. He chose to save you. That means something. That means you have to live in a way that makes his choice worthwhile. Vachon held her tightly, feeling the truth of those words settle into her bones. I will, she promised. I will. The taxi back to the airport waited at the curb. She climbed in and gave the driver her destination, then turned to watch the Kowalski house shrink in a rear window until it disappeared around a corner. One promise kept, one debt honored. Now came the rest of her life. The ceremony took place on a Thursday morning at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. 200 sailors stood in formation on the parade ground, their uniforms sharp against the California sun, their faces turned toward the platform, where Vachon stood beside Admiral Joe and a row of officers whose ribbons told stories of their own. She wore her dress whites for the first time since qualification. The uniform felt different now, heavier with meaning, weighted by the names of people who would never wear theirs again. Hendricks, Kowalski, Darnell. The ghosts stood with her in the morning light, invisible witnesses to what their sacrifices had made possible. Admiral Zhou stepped to the microphone. The crowd fell silent. We are gathered today to recognize extraordinary valor in the face of overwhelming odds. The Admiral's voice carried across the parade ground with the clarity of someone accustomed to being heard. Chief Petty Officer Kestrel Vachon distinguished herself through actions that exemplify the highest traditions of the United States Navy and the Special Operations community. The citation was read aloud. Vachon listened to the words describe what she had done, the clinical language of military commendation, transforming chaos and terror into neat paragraphs of heroism. Angaja numerically superior a nemi forças. Provided precision fire support. Enabled the survival of wounded personnel. The sentences captured facts while missing everything that mattered. They did not mention the smell of Kowalski's blood, did not describe the sound of Morrison's labored breathing or the weight of Briggs's confession in the darkness of the plantation. They did not explain how fear tasted or how grief felt or how the jungle had tried to swallow her whole and failed. But that was the nature of citations. They recorded what could be measured. The rest lived only in the memories of those who had been there. Admiral Zhou lifted the silver star from its case. The metal caught the sunlight, its rays and center star gleaming against blue ribbon. She pinned it to Vachon's chest with careful precision, then stepped back and saluted. Vachon returned the salute, held it for 3 heartbeats, then dropped her hand and faced the assembled sailors. The applause began slowly and built into something that rolled across the parade ground like thunder. She stood at attention and let it wash over her, accepting what it represented without letting it change what she knew to be true. The medal was not for her alone. It belonged to everyone who had held the line at the plantation, to the dead as much as the living. After the ceremony, a reception filled the officers' club with conversation and congratulations. Vachon moved through the crowd, shaking hands, accepting praise, performing the social rituals that military life demanded. Her shoulder had healed enough to allow a firm grip, though the scar would remain forever. She found Salcedo near the bar. Nursing a drink, he seemed more interested in holding than consuming. He smiled when he saw her. "Chief Vachon," he said, "or should I call you Hero now?" "Please do not." He laughed. "Fair enough. How does it feel?" She considered the question. Like wearing someone else's clothes. Like being thanked for surviving when others did not. That sounded about right. Salcedo raised his glass. "To the ones who are not here. To the ones who are not here." They drank in silence. Around them, the reception continued its cheerful noise, oblivious to the private memorial being conducted in its midst. A familiar figure appeared at the edge of the crowd. Briggs stood near the entrance, his uniform bearing the marks of his new assignment, a training billet at Great Lakes that would keep him far from operational deployments. He looked older than he had 2 months ago, smaller somehow, as if the weight of his choices had compressed him into a diminished version of himself. Their eyes met across the room. Neither moved for a long moment. Then Briggs nodded once, a gesture that carried acknowledgement and something that might have been gratitude. Vachon returned the nod. Nothing more was needed. Nothing more was possible. He left without approaching her. She watched him go and felt something that was not quite forgiveness, but was no longer anger either. The space between those emotions had a name she could not identify. Perhaps it did not need one. Master Chief Okonkwo found her as the reception wound down. He carried an envelope that bore the official seal of Naval Special Warfare Command. "Orders," he said, "came through this morning." She took the envelope and opened it. Read the contents twice to make sure she understood. "Sniper instructor," she said. "Advanced Training Division." Okonkwo nodded. "You will be teaching the next generation. Passing on what you know." He paused. It is what Darnell would have wanted. She thought of Darnell's letters, the ones Okonkwo had described. Thought of Kowalski's dream of teaching kids from difficult neighborhoods. Thought of Amanda's words about living in a way that made sacrifice worthwhile. "Yes," she said, "it is. The reception ended. The crowd dispersed. Vashon walked alone to the edge of the base where the beach met the Pacific, her dress shoes sinking slightly in the sand. The ocean stretched to the horizon, endless and indifferent, the same water that had carried her to distant shores and would carry others after her. She pulled a photograph from her pocket. Darnell and Kowalski, taken during a rare moment of downtime on a deployment she could barely remember. They were laughing at something outside the frame, their faces bright with the easy joy of men who did not know what was coming. "I'm going to teach them," she said to the photograph. "Everything you taught me. Everything I learned because you were there. I'm going to make sure it matters." The wind carried her words out over the water. She stood there until the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber that reminded her of the jungle at dawn. Then she tucked the photograph away and turned back toward the base, toward the future, toward the students who would learn from her mistakes and her triumphs and carry both forward into battles she would never see. The silver star weighed against her chest, a reminder, a responsibility, a promise. She had survived the jungle, had held the line when everything said she should fall, had emerged from darkness, carrying the memories of those who had not. Now came the harder work, living, teaching, honoring the dead by shaping the living. Chief Petty Officer Kestrel Vashon walked off the beach and into the rest of her life. If this story moved you, share your thoughts about what resonated most, whether it was a favorite character or a moment that stayed with you. Or tell us about someone you know who showed extraordinary courage when everything was against them. Your stories matter as much as the ones we tell here.